Hello, Wake Up New Zealand, Karasiki speaking. I think this is a very good time. In fact, I know it's a very good time to be talking about Te Tiriti and the Treaty of Waitangi. And I want to go back to the Waitangi Tribunal, 10th of May 2010. This was a month after John Key actually arranged with Peter Sharples, co-leader of the Maori Party, to go off to the UN to sign the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous People. That was all done under a veil of secrecy, and that was a deal so that the Maori Party would jump on board with John Key, the National Party. Let's go back a bit, because 13th of September 2007, Rosemary Banks was the representative of New Zealand at the UN. Now, 13th of September 2007, that UNDRIP had taken 25 years to actually draft. I'll go on a bit about what happened before it was drafted, when it was drafted. But firstly, I will tell you why Labour actually said, look, this is too difficult, we can't adopt this, and they didn't adopt it. In fact, there were 11 abstentions. 148 countries signed it, adopted it. It's a non-binding agreement, declaration. And also 4 countries actually did not adopt it, opposed it. So that was the US, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. So why didn't New Zealand adopt it? And this should make you really aware of what is going on right now with this hikoi, because this is the Hei Pūpua. This is Vision 2040. This is what this hikoi is about. It's not particularly about the treaty. You've got to understand that I have the paperwork here that says the principle of the treaty is the UNDRIP. So to understand that, this is why there is a warring party going on, because there's so much to lose. So Rosemary Banks said, look, we can't agree to this for the following reasons. A, this gives Indigenous people, which Iwi like to call themselves, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, gives them veto rights over everyone else. It gives them veto rights over all legislation in Parliament. It gives the ownership, control of the entire lands and natural resources of New Zealand, a redress, compensation of all lands in New Zealand. It is non-compliant with our legalities, non-compliant with our constitutional arrangements. It is non-compliant with the treaty. And it's a 2-class citizenship. Okay, so Indigenous, where did that come from? Well, the person who first coined the word Indigenous peoples, that was Marang o Pakapuni. He was from the Maasai tribe. He got a government grant. He went to university. He was very educated and a very vocal activist. He became a member of the Tanzanian Parliament. Now, what he did, he tried to get as many African countries within the continent of Africa together. Now, this was about colonization, decolonization. He was the first to actually coin that phrase, to actually bring them all in a group called Indigenous people, a collective, like cultural Marxism, a collective. Now, George Manuel, he was the president of the Colombian Indian Brotherhood. He had adopted this phrase of Pacapunes termed Indigenous peoples. Now, it was Justin Trudeau, father, Pierre Trudeau, that arranged a Canadian delegation with George Manuel to come to New Zealand in 1971. So Manuel went to Australia and he came to New Zealand. And it was here that he met the Maori Council, New Zealand Maori Council. Now, the New Zealand Maori Council, with Sir Graham Latimer as chair, who was pushing forward a new law for the Maori. It was said to be a very slow process through the courts. With Waitangi Tribunal, that later came about, these are all part of it. Ngāpuhi, leaders of the Ngāpuhi tribe were part of this. Now, between them, they arranged to actually set up a World Council, a World Indigenous Council at the UN. And then they produced a charter. That led on to 25 years of different people, like Moana Jackson was there at the UN in 1990 to draft this UNDRIP, which was adopted on the 13th of September 2007, which Labour refused to adopt. But then John Key in 2010 did that deal with Peter Sharples and went and adopted it. So this is how it all happened. So I have this document here, and this is why I say this is all about the UNDRIP. There was a meeting, I believe, of 2021, Auckland University, Claire Charters, who runs off to the UN every so often to the World Indigenous Council to push this along in New Zealand, embed it in New Zealand. But to make it legally binding, they have to enter it into domestic policy. If they embedded it in the Constitution, that would work. So what happened? They arranged a Carrero Constitutional Convention at Auckland University. There were visitors from overseas that came. Nania Mahuta opened the speech on the second day. Now, this was all about embedding the UNDRIP into the constitutional arrangements of New Zealand, to partner it with the Tiriti of Waitangi as a principal. I kid you not. So Sir Graham Latimer, Titiwhai Harawira, 10th of May 2010, I have the documentation here that actually explains this. So I'm going to just read you a couple of little bits of it. So it starts off with the first page. Now it's 32 pages, so obviously I'm not going to read a lot. So it says, today we stand here on the very soil where our tupuna stood and debated the future of our Ngāpuhi nation. So everything is about benefiting the Ngāpuhi nation. The whole thing started with benefiting the Ngāpuhi nation. So these debates were guided by rules of kapu mauna, where your word was your bond. And they speak about the chiefs who signed to Tiriti, and they said we've got to make sure that we honour the Tiriti, but we didn't cede sovereignty. And this is what they say in this paperwork. And they say we must adopt the Declaration of Independence, 1835, to prove our rangatiratanga. And it says no one can ever challenge that. So it goes on to talk about the Treaty of Waitangi, 1840, Tiriti, affirmed our rangatiratanga on the transition to a state in a joint declaration with the Crown. And that's our informal constitution. Well, the first constitution in New Zealand was 1852, and Queen Victoria's Royal Charter was actually the founding document of New Zealand, which was in 16th of November 1840. It wasn't the Treaty of Waitangi. So the 6th of February, we became a founding separate country from New South Wales on the 16th of November 1840. We were founded. We had our own flag. We were given our own government, our own laws to make. We were no longer attached. So, going on to this, it goes on to say on page 9, this is official documentation from Waitangi Tribunal, by the way, and it's got an official stamp on it, stamped by the government. And it goes on to say, in 1971, George Manuel of British Columbia, President of National Indian Brotherhood, came here to meet with the New Zealand Maori Council. It had been to Australia, but finding no national Aboriginal organisation in the place, as in the United States of America, he came to New Zealand and sought the New Zealand Maori Council's support. He proposed the formation of a World Council to represent all Indigenous people. This is where the phrase first came from. That 10th of May 2010. But he came to New Zealand in 1971. But it's under 2010 official document from the Waitangi Tribunal. So they're just going over the history of it. When he visited, he met with the New Zealand Maori Council, and then he said that he proposed the formation of a World Council to represent all Indigenous people and the development of a charter on Indigenous rights, which the World Council would issue itself. That would be them. This is the Maori Council, Ngāpuhi, and also George Manuel. So the New Zealand Maori Council and the National Indian Brotherhood, in subsequent organisation conferences, so they had conferences about this, finally Sir Graham Latimer led the council contingent to formally endorse the birth of a World Council of Indigenous People at Port Alberni, British Columbia in 1975, with 260 Indigenous representatives to support it. The World Council went on to develop its own charter for Indigenous people's rights. All came from New Zealand with George Manuel to obtain observer rights at the UN instead of just being an NGO. And this is what they say. It supports Te Tiriti o Waitangi and other treaties with Indigenous peoples and provides a framework for the treaty issues can be debated. So it goes on to say, but underlying everything is the principle of rangatiratanga. Rangatiratanga is the Maori of Indigenous Peoples Declaration. Now, this is it. The treaty principle is the Indigenous Peoples Declaration, the UNDRIP, the control, the ownership of all the land in New Zealand. It is the veto rights over legislation, ownership, control of all natural resources, compensation, redress for all the land, having rights that you don't have, a two-class citizenship. That is the principle that they are after. This is why they are warring David Seymour, because they have so much to lose. Just follow the gravy train. It is about this principle. Now, Winston Peters says that they're going to get rid of the UNDRIP. So how are they going to do that? So if it's been known that, you don't have to make a UN agreement or declaration binding. If it's non-binding, it goes into soft law, can be used by the judicial. And the judicial has been pushing the corruption. You have local government, central government, all been pushing the corruption. So this has been happening for a long time. And this talks about the very foundations of identity and the ability, the sense of injustice, the decolonization, and it goes on. And it says to our Ngāpuhi nation, because Ngāpuhi were there, because Graham Latimer was the chair of Ngāpuhi at this Waitangi meeting on the 10th of May, 2010, with Tiriti Harawira. And it says, to our Ngāpuhi nation did our tupuna cede sovereignty. If not, why, in the early 1970s, did Ngā Tamatoa, along with the New Zealand Maori Council, emerge? So they emerged to address the injustices that they said they faced as Maori. We fought hard for our rights as Maori, our land, our culture, to confront injustices perpetrated by the New Zealand government. The New Zealand government, that they say it's the Crown, and there's no royal purse to actually pay for all these breaches by the Crown. It's not coming out of King Charles's pocket. It's coming out of ratepayers' pockets, taxpayers' pockets. It's multiple millions, and it continues. So they talk about, in 1972, a petition in Parliament was signed by 32,000 people seeking te reo Māori in schools. Well, fair enough, but it should be by choice. So it shouldn't be shoved down your necks. We shouldn't have racial stuff happening in schools. So it just says the tribunal process is inconsistent with the Declaration of 1835, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, totally inconsistent with the absolute belief of Ngāpuhi nation. So, and they said they didn't cede sovereignty. So therefore, we are mindful that Indigenous people's rights, the Declaration, provides us with the absolute right to use UN forum to be heard, not as an NGO, but as observer rights to give us a voice, the voice of the Ngāpuhi nation. This is all about benefiting the Ngāpuhi nation. If we of Ngāpuhi, we will benefit, and it is the future of all Ngāpuhi at stake. So they were making a submission. So Graham Latimer was thanked by Ngāpuhi at this meeting, and so was Tiriti Harawira. And at the end of the document, it says, Waitangi Tribunal and the Crown, they must know that we did not cede sovereignty and stay with that one. Now, this is an official record that was stamped official by the Ministry of Justice, 10th of May, 2010. So the principle of Tiriti is the UN Declaration of Indigenous Rights. Wake up, New Zealand. This is what the war party is about.